Hello my beautiful book besties, my name is Liv if you are new here to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about more spring recommendations. So in my previous spring video, I gave you guys my personal reading list that I'm hoping to knock out this spring season, but in this video, I'm actually going to give you spring recommendations based off books I've actually read and I actually associate with this time of year. So I have with me 20 to 25 different books or book ideas that I think you guys should read this spring. Of course, it's a big variety of books. I have romance, I have cozies, I have graphic novels and manga, I have all sorts of different books. So hopefully, depending on your taste, you will find something here that you want to pick up that's new this spring. I know everyone has their own personal book taste, but for me, I loved all of these books and can highly recommend you picking them up. So without further rambling, let's just go ahead and dive into these recommendations. So first things first, we are going to start with two middle grade books. Middle grade is so easy and light and fun and fluffy for the spring season, and if you guys are not Studio Ghibli fans, I'm here to try to convince you, if you have not watched Howl's Moving Castle or Kiki's Delivery Service or Ponyo or any of those movies, please watch them this spring, because I'm telling you, they are the most aesthetic spring, calming, peaceful movies I think I've ever seen. So of course, my number one recommendation for the spring season has to be Howl's Moving Castle. I love this book. It is so funny, it's so witty. The movie especially is just so heartfelt, and like I said, I almost recommend watching the movie and then reading the book, because you can kind of picture the characters and the scenery, and it just comes to life even more that way. So maybe an unpopular opinion there by watching the movie before reading the book, but honestly, I cannot think of anything more spring than Studio Ghibli. And because of that reason, I also have Kiki's Delivery Service, which is my personal favorite of all time, about a girl who just goes on these little adventures to save her town with her little black cat named Gigi. It's set in a small coastal town and it's just filled with so much charm of everyday life. There's even a bakery that plays into a big part of this story. These books sit on my shelves as a classic at this point because they're just so heartwarming and comforting. Anytime I need a comforting read, I pick these up or I watch the movies. So these are probably my number one recommendations for the spring season. And of course, I couldn't talk about romance books without mentioning Abby Jimenez. I have Part of Your World here. The light blue and the orange and the yellow just looks very spring, but also this book just gives the charming small town feel because our main character ends up getting stranded on the side of the road. She's actually like a really good surgeon. She works in the medical field, so she's very much a city girl, and she ends up getting rescued by this small town guy, and she ends up staying in the small town for a little while, falling in love with it. There's so many deeper meanings in this book, but what makes me think of springtime is the main guy actually has a pet goat, and there's other farm animals, and it's just very spring, summery time of feeling. And of course, you're gonna get those warm feelings just as you read this in general, and it's going to soften your heart and just make you think all things spring. So if you have not read any Abby books yet, please do so. Come back and thank me later. I do recommend reading these in order. Reading this one first and then yours truly. The second one is my all-time favorite romance of literally ever. I just adore her and her books, and I couldn't make this video without mentioning her. And if you love Abby Jimenez and you loved Part of Your World, I couldn't make this video without mentioning Sarah Adams. We have When in Rome and Practice Makes Perfect. I have yet to read Practice Makes Perfect, but I know this one takes place at a floral shop. One of the sisters actually owns her own shop, so of course I recommend reading this one, but because this one technically comes first in like the series, highly recommend this one first. If you love Part of Your World, you love small town feel, and typically I'm not someone that's super into like celebrities or famous kind of romance, but we have another situation where our main character kind of gets stuck on the side of the road. This guy rescues her, they fall in love, and it's just super cute, super charming. And Sarah Adams writes the cutest like everyday life moments between the characters that I I just love because it feels so realistic and so relatable. So if these are not on your radar, please put them on your radar. I'm definitely going to be finally reading this one this spring. It just looks perfect. It looks so cute and I'm so excited to read it. Another one of her books that I read last year and absolutely fell in love with, mainly because it's in Charleston, and anytime that I go to Charleston, I typically go in the spring or summertime, and that is The Match by Sarah Adams. This book is about a girl who struggles with, I think, epilepsy or some type of chronic illness, but her job is to match people like her with their own personal like service dog. And in this story we have a grumpy guy who is very protective of his daughter. I forget how they actually meet in the beginning, but he is a single dad, and his daughter somehow convinces her dad that she needs some type of service pet, and so of course they end up falling in love, and it's just this really sweet, beautiful story. But again, it's just set in Charleston, and I love that setting and aspect of it so much. So for me personally, I have a tie to spring or summer with this one. But if you've read other Sarah Adams books and you're looking to start in her backlist, this would be the perfect place to start. And another one of my favorite authors of all time who I actually owe it to for getting into romance in the first place. I was never really interested in romance at all until I heard about this book and I heard no one else talking about it, and that is The Dead Romantics. If you've been around here long enough, this is no surprise to you. First of all, this cover is very spring. It's very bright. There's flowers at the bottom. I honestly can't remember if this book specifically takes place during spring, so I'm kind of going off vibes of the cover here. And honestly, I did that with some of these other books as well, because you just look at it and you think spring, and so it makes you want to pick it up during the season. But this is another one of those heartfelt but also really deep books that talks about death and grief, and this girl essentially is a writer and she falls in love with a ghost. So what really got me into romance is Ashley Poston, because she writes magical elements into her romance, and for me as a fantasy reader, there's nothing better than including magic into any book that I read, so this was just perfect for me. Again, another one of my all-time favorites. She also came out with a book last year called The 7-Year Slip that I have to recommend. Based off the cover, we have lemons. It's a bright yellow. The main love interest in this story has a very southern drawl, and he makes lemon pies, and there's just little sprinkles of spring elements throughout this book that I just really love and recommend for this time of year. So all of those books I just talked about were adult romances, but the one young adult that I can recommend is Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. This is a brand new author to me. I read her a couple weeks ago and I absolutely fell in love. For being young adult, this book is way more mature, I feel like, than a lot of other young adult books are. Typically I don't read contemporary romance, but I am so excited to get more into her books. The main reason I'm choosing this one for spring though is because obviously the cover is very bright, very fun, but also the time of year this takes place is it does lead up to prom, which typically takes place in the spring. So I definitely feel like this fits the spring season. She even has like a pink dress on with flowers, and it just gives you all those warm fuzzy feelings that you're looking for this time of year. The next book I have to recommend is actually one that I feel like is very underrated, but if you are a fan of the Dead Romantics, I highly suggest trying this one out. That is The Kindred Spirit Supper Club by Amy E. Reichert. She is another author that includes magical elements in her stories, because in this book our main character Sabrina has this family curse on her where she sees ghosts. So basically she has this kind of familiar ghost that's always over her shoulder giving her romance advice, which I thought was hilarious. There were so many funny moments in this that I was not expecting. This was another one of those friends to lovers kind of slow build books that I really appreciated, and even though this starts out at an indoor water park, I feel like the cover obviously gives off those spring vibes. So I love this book. I think I gave it 4.5 or 5 stars, and I need more people to read it so I can actually talk about it to someone. The next book I have is a good mashup of several different genres, including romance, including mystery, and it's just a really hard book to read, but in the best way possible. Just know this is going to stir up a bunch of emotions. I know this book is popular, but hear me out. If you have not read Where the Crawdads Sing, please read this book and watch the movie. It is going to get you in the perfect spring summer mood, because it takes place in North Carolina on the coast where there is lots of water and there's nature, author, and this is basically about a girl who gets abandoned by her family and she has an abusive father situation, but unfortunately she is accused of murdering someone in this small town. So there's the mystery aspect there, which is my favorite part of this. The ending still makes me drop my jaw every single time, and I love this story. I will die on this hill. I know a lot of people think it's boring, but I think it's such a good, impactful story, and the movie definitely did this book justice. Like, I love both of these evenly, and typically I like the book better. So if you have not watched the movie or made it a priority to do so, I definitely recommend at least trying it. Because you all know your girl is such a huge fantasy reader, I do have some fantasy books that I recommend this time of year, but this first one is a little bit more dystopian. So think foresty, Hunger Games kind of nature setting, and you have The Gracier by Kim Liggett. I have been trying to patiently wait for this author to come out with something else. So this book actually does take place in different seasons, and one of them is spring, near about the halfway point, which is another reason why I like to recommend this book. In this small town, women are rumored to have this magical ability to kind of overtake and lure the men. And so what happens is they throw these women out, kind of like a reaping. They get chosen, they get thrown out into the woods to basically survive, but basically to kill each other until there's only one person left. This book was intense, it was kind of spooky, it gave me the Village vibes, and there's just a lot about this to love. I could not put it down. So if you are looking for a book that has those dystopian feelings of nostalgia like The Hunger Games, you could definitely give this one a try. Another book that I always love to recommend around this time of year, and I need to reread it myself because the second one is coming out very soon, that is House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. If you love humor and you love found family, I feel like everyone and anyone could get something from this book. There's a man named Linus who's in charge of going to this orphanage, and he kind of does check-ins to make sure they're all safe and everything is as it should be. They all have very special abilities, which makes it so humorous and so fun. But when Linus arrives, Arthur, who's kind of like the master of this orphanage, supposedly has a secret that Linus is supposed to uncover. So there's mystery and there's magic, it's set by the sea, so it just gives off those warm feelings and that warm setting that I love so much. But mainly what I love about this one is the found family trope. It does not get any better than this. If you love that trope as well, definitely read this one and tell me what you think. Another book that I read recently is A Fragile Enchantment by Allison Saft. This cover screams nothing more than spring. I do not think it gets any better than this. Not only that, but this story is just full of Bridgerton, Regency, Victorian kind of vibes that I feel like you crave this time of year. Our main love interest in this story has this magical ability, I guess you could call it, where whenever he is full of emotion or anger specifically, there's just like plants and flowers that start popping up everywhere. And I just thought that was such a neat idea of showing emotions, but in a fantasy world. Not only that, but our main character Neve weaves emotions and feelings into the dresses because she's basically a dressmaker, and her clothing is beautiful. It reminds me of Bridgerton, and I can just picture it so vividly. It's very romantic, and it's also just kind of a slow burn, cozy kind of fantasy. So if that is your vibe, I would definitely pick this one up. Another book that I wanted to recommend that I don't currently have in my possession is Flowerheart. If you loved Flowerheart, I definitely recommend reading A Fragile Enchantment. If you loved A Fragile Enchantment, I definitely recommend reading Flowerheart. Flowerheart reads a little bit more middle grade in my opinion. Fragile Enchantment runs a little bit deeper than that. But what I love about Flowerheart is the mental health representation. Just like in A Fragile Enchantment, the character in this book, she has flowers and things that just explode out of her when her emotions are heightened or her feelings towards someone are just so big. But her father's chest is blooming with flowers. So she goes on a mission to save him, and she runs into other characters and people that are trying to help her. And with that, of course, comes many other emotions and different things that happen to just make flowers and plants basically explode everywhere all the time. It's literally exploding with spring. Another book that I read recently and ended up in my favorites list of last year is The Unmaking of Farrow by Adrienne. As you can imagine from the cover, this book has a lot of nature and and water and different outdoor settings that take place all throughout this story. This is about a girl who has been cursed like the rest of her family, and I'm not going to give any more details on it because I went into this book knowing nothing, and I feel like that was the best way to experience this book. Not only do we have this kind of magical curse element, but there is a sense of found family and a lot of other deeper meanings that run throughout this story that made me really emotional. But overall, the setting for this one just screams spring or summer to me. They talk about warm summer nights and sunsets, and there's just so many atmospheric parts of this book that really make me want to reread it this spring. Last but not least, I have loaned out my copy again for this, is Belladonna. This is the perfect springtime book because obviously the cover looks very spring. It gives off those Regency vibes. The atmosphere is not only spooky and gothic, but there's also so many springtime elements to this. But if you are a spooky season person that loves paranormal books, but it's springtime and you want to pick up something spooky still, this is the perfect combination. And I personally cannot wait to get to Foxglove. The first one is very romantic with a really good mystery weaved into that, and it was just such a unique experience, and I highly recommend the audiobooks if you do pick these ones up. Next, I do have a couple recommendations for you mystery people out there, starting with Finley Donovan is killing it. No, this does not necessarily take place in the spring, but from the cover, it's pink. It looks very spring to me. It's a very fast-paced book that I love and enjoy so much. I'm obsessed with this series, and I feel like I haven't talked about it in a while on my channel. So here's a plug to read this book if you have not read it yet. Yes, there are many parts that are unbelievable. This is about Finley, who's sitting at a Panera one day with her publisher or her agent of some sort, and someone overhears the plot of her new mystery thriller and believes her to be a hitman, and is then somehow hired to be a hitman to go kill someone else's husband. But if you just want a fun story to escape into, I would definitely try Finley Donovan, because I promise you will probably be laughing throughout most of this book. These next couple books, I'm definitely going off vibes here because the covers are just very spring, very whimsical, and that is Juniper Bean Resorts to Murder and Heidi Lucy Loses Her Mind. I have yet to read the second one, but this first one was so much fun. It definitely caught me off guard with how much I loved it, and if you are looking for a cute but funny romance, I would definitely pick this one up, but that also has a good mystery behind it, and there's actually a harder hitting topic in this book that I was not expecting, but really added some more depth to the story that I really appreciated. Juniper Bean is a romance author who cannot stop killing her main characters. She writes mysteries, but she somehow ends up with an unexpected male roommate, and that whole scenario is just unbelievable, but honestly so funny. So Juniper and Aiden are kind of thrust into this own mystery that Juniper is going through herself that has a lot to do with her past. This book is about Heidi, who somehow ends up with a head wound and can't remember much about her past, which I love the memory loss trope. It might not be for everyone. If you are looking for something that just gives off those spring vibes with the covers, I feel like these are very underrated. Last but not least, one of the most recent mystery thrillers I read is The Villa by Rachel Hawkins. This is the perfect spring cover, you guys. The yellow and the blue with the lemons. Not only that, but we have two best friends who decide to take a trip to Italy. Our main character is going through a divorce, so she just needs to get away, but she's also a cozy mystery writer, and her best friend is also a writer. Don't let any of those fun Italian vibes fool you though, because we also have a past timeline where there is a murder at this villa that our main character is slowly uncovering, and I love and adored that aspect. This is definitely one for those who like Daisy Jones or like a musical element, Mary Shelley, Fleetwood Mac. All of those elements weaved into one really made for an interesting story, and I really enjoyed this one. The last portion of this video, I want to talk about none other than graphic novels and manga, which are my favorite way to get in the spring mood. Obviously, the artwork and the illustration style is a big part that makes me want to get in that spring mood, and my number one spring recommendation is always the Anne of Green Gables graphic novel. I wish I had this with me, but I don't think I actually own this for some reason, but the artwork is stunning. It's full of greens and blues, and I feel like a lot of us in general associate Anne with springtime. So if you are a fan of the classic Anne, I would definitely read this graphic novel. I feel like this is just gonna be perfect if you already love that story. I also have another one of my top favorites that I read last year and loved it, but I'm letting it out right now, is the first graphic novel of Enola Holmes. Obviously this cover is very spring with the cherry blossoms. Not only that, but the illustration style is this beautiful watercolor. But if you're a person that likes more mysteries, I definitely recommend picking this one up because there's 3 kind of mini stories in just this one novel, and there's actually number 2 and I think possibly a number 3 coming. So I'm very excited to pick the second one up this spring when I get around to it. And if you love Sherlock Holmes, I mean, this is basically gonna be perfect for you. Another graphic novel that I love so much, and I wish I had it with me to show you, is Seance Tea Party. Springtime is obviously the perfect time to have a picnic and a tea party, and this book could not be any more perfect. This is a middle grade where our main character befriends a ghost, and the deeper meaning throughout this story of just always having that inner child and never losing that childlike wonder was just so impactful, and I feel like very needed, especially for adults. Even though this is a middle grade, definitely don't think it's not something you can't read and get something from. I'm gonna be rereading this one this year and I honestly cannot wait. I also have The Moth Keeper by Katie O'Neill, which is perfect for spring. How many times can I say that? Obviously from the cover it's like this beautiful pastel yellow, but then we also just have so many bright colors and moths throughout this book. In this book we have our main character Anya, who actually ends up being the main moth keeper. I can't remember all the lore or the history with the divide between these 2 different creatures, but she has to go out every night and protect the moths and basically be a lookout for their town, but it's not something that she feels like she is big enough and good enough to do. So the story was just so sweet to see the character development unravel. Next, I do not have number 1 with me. I don't know where it is. I couldn't find it, but if you all have not read Lightfall yet, please make this like your top number 1 priority. What mainly screams spring to me for this one is all of the nature scenes we get in this. We have so much water and forest scenes, especially in the first one. It's about this girl who struggles with anxiety, and I love the mental health representation in this one as well. But she befriends this creature who is trying to help her look for her uncle, but they go on this grand adventure together, and there's all these different scary things that happen and things that she has to work through, and it's just very relatable even for like a little middle grade book. So once again, this one is so small and so beautiful, but it does really pack a punch with a deeper meaning. And last but not least, you know how I told you earlier that Studio Ghibli is like the perfect springtime feel? Well, I am here to give you a manga recommendation that I do not see people talk about very often, that is very Studio Ghibli. That is Beyond the Clouds, The Girl Who Fell from the Sky. I have volume 1 here and volume 3 just to show you kind of the art style throughout this book, but this is just such a sweet, precious little story about a boy who is very mechanical and good at building things. His name is Theo, and one day he finds this girl who has no memories whatsoever. One of her wings is broken and he actually works to mend those wings. There's not a whole lot of words, but there is just this beautiful, simple illustration style, and the back actually says a dreamlike odyssey that's part Studio Ghibli, part Final Fantasy. So if you are interested in either one of those things, this would be the perfect pick for you. Well friends, those are my top recommendations for this time of year. I compared my list this year to previous videos and I tried to make sure there wasn't too much overlap, so I really hope you were able to find something new. If you've read any of these before, please let me know, or if you want to recommend me something spring that was not on this list, I would love to add more to my personal spring reading list. But thank you so much for taking time out of your day and watching this video and supporting my channel. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video.